Hello there, my name's Adam Forbes and I am the host of the Corporate Escapology podcast and the author of Corporate Escapology, the book. Somewhere. Today, my guest is Primo. Primo seems to be living the absolute dream, if you believe everything you see on LinkedIn. He's always in far-flung cities and he's doing a sterling job of helping teams really build great cultures from a position of learning about themselves as individuals and how they relate to each other. He uses something called the Insights Discovery tool that many corporates have relied on over the years to get to know themselves better with these little Lego bricks. And I really want to speak to Primo particularly because I think what he's been able to do is to take a product that he was able to develop, but also build a lot around and a lot of experience to underpin, that he was able to use within his job at BP and take it externally. And so as he left through redundancy, he was able to carry on the experience that he'd been delivering at BP and turn it into a business for himself and work directly with the organization that runs the tool. And it's a great example for all of us to take forward how we could package up some of the skills and experience and knowledge that we have built over decades, maybe in some cases like Primo's, and offer it differently to different kinds of clients afterwards. So take note, lots of lessons here, both about the transition as well as what he's been able to do to generate income beyond a corporate career. Let's meet Primo now. Hey Primo, great to have you on the Corporate Escapology podcast today. Thanks for joining me.
Really a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Adam.
Of course, you're somebody I've wanted to have on this for a while. So let's get started. So it looks like you went straight into corporate life from university. So was there a plan? Did you always think, I'm going to work in one of these big companies that everyone knows the name of?
I don't know if there was a plan, but probably yes. So I'm so old that I did something called a sandwich degree, which meant that I did 2 years study, a year in industry, then a year to finish the degree. And I did that year at IBM in Basingstoke. I was already kind of immersed in a big corporate culture before I graduated. And so, it kind of seemed natural then to apply to some big companies and see what happened. But yeah, as for a plan, no, I'm not sure anything has ever been very planned.
But what was it then that attracted you? You obviously liked it while you were in that sandwich year then at IBM?
Yeah, so I kind of I started off in IT, which I'm sure we'll kind of cover. And I kind of always had a passion for IT and I like technology. I'm a bit of a gadget person and I go out and buy stuff with buttons on it. And so doing that year was really good, actually. It just got me into thinking about working in tech is going to be a nice space to be in. And then when I got the gig at BP, it was for an IT project management job.
Okay.
And so I ended up in that space very quickly, where I was kind of the middleman between the real technical developers and the customers and what they needed.
I see. So you weren't like the coding person.
I was never a coder, but I always got on with both sides of that equation. So I got on really well with the developers. I could understood things from their perspective. And I also really liked working with clients and trying to understand what they needed. So I guess my role for a long time was bridging that gap.
Yeah, I mean, you say a long time. It was pretty much nearly 20 years doing those kinds of roles, not just for BP, you mentioned an IBM, but GE was in the mix. Is it T?
Yeah, so I was at GE for a while. I was at some smaller companies in between as well. But yeah, always doing that kind of project management role where you were interfacing with clients. And that's the bit that I really liked, actually. So throughout the project process, I think there are different types of project managers. And so I was a relationship-focused project manager. I loved working with the client, loved scoping things. Once I got to delivering and executing the plan and managing risk logs, I started to lose a tiny bit of interest. Whereas there were lots of people around me who loved that part of it.
Really good at those things. Yeah, walking on.
So it's an interesting role, actually, because I think you can do it from lots of different ways. There are different ways of achieving the same results.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And um, I mean, maybe it was a bit easier in a bigger company, but how did you sort of sell yourself as somebody that is good at that relationship part, which sometimes people don't give the credit to, versus the Prince 2 kind of
Yeah,
approach
yeah, yeah, yeah.
management?
And I did all that stuff as well, by the way. I did the PMP and I did the Prince too. You know, I went through I think what a lot of people do, which is you graduate and you say, that's me done, never doing another exam. And then a few years later, I find myself studying again and writing essays. Um, I don't know if it was ever about selling myself for me, I guess, and we'll come on to insights. Obviously, based on my insights profile, working with people is really at the heart of everything I do. And
Mm,
so building relationships and understanding what people want just always felt very natural to me.
yeah.
It was funny during that year at IBM, a couple of people said to me, "Oh, you could make a really good salesman,"
Oh,
and
really?
that always made me smile because I thought, "No, I don't think that's me. I'm not in it to make the bonus or to win the sale." But obviously, those people's skills were coming across to others quite
Yeah,
early
and
on.
I think a good salesperson is a problem solver, really, at the heart
Yeah,
of what they're doing. Of course, they're motivated by different incentives potentially, but at the heart, there's a problem that a customer has, and a good salesperson particularly will try and solve that. Bad ones will try and flog solutions that customers they want, but good ones,
yeah.
yeah, trying to plug that gap there. And I guess to a degree, that's what you were doing. You know, you
Yeah,
build a
and that
team.
problem solving thing, I think that problem solving thing is an absolute key part of most large organizations. You know, you're faced with challenges literally every day, and it's like, how are we gonna fix this?
Mm.
And so I was within a community of people who were very solution orientated. And from my experience talking to lots of people, that's very common.
Yeah.
You know, how do we get this fixed? How do we move forward on this particular challenge? And not always thinking about how are people interacting with this, how are they feeling as this is happening to them or around them.
Mm. Yeah, so that's it. So let's let's stop here on the IT thing, because we could talk about a great career you had in IT and project
Mm.
management. But the really interesting thing for me is not what, I mean, it is interesting what about leaving, and I want to come to that. But there feels like there was this pivot, and maybe it had been happening for a long time because, as you said, it was people that was always the motivator. But this
Mm.
pivot where you started to take on more roles that were associated with people and less about the IT and talent,
Yeah,
capability development. And that's certainly the Primo that I came across that was
yeah,
really always in that kind of space there. So what prompted that shift, and was it as much of a pivot as it seems to me?
yeah. I could probably categorize it in two distinct parts. So one felt like quite a natural progression. So that piece around delivering projects, I got to the point where I thought, you know, I really love starting the project, but I'm not so keen once we're up
Mm.
and running. And so, and maybe that has to do with having quite a short attention span as well. I would have described myself as one of those kind of jack of all trades type people.
Mm.
I wasn't a subject matter expert in anything in particular, but I was a relationship building and I could get things to move forward. And so there was a kind of gradual progression through my IT career where I moved out of delivery and I moved into capability, as you say.
Mm.
So I started to look after the resourcing of IT project managers. I would be interviewing tons of people. I
Ah,
then ran a resource pool. So we had this kind of consultancy type model where we
oh,
had a pool of IT project managers and I was responsible for allocating them to work and also thinking about their development.
right.
So that really started to kind of hone. Okay, this really drives me now. And I've
Mm.
said to numerous managers at the time, you know, I don't think I want to do the delivery thing anymore. I think this is my sweet spot,
Oh,
enabling others to deliver really successfully.
yeah.
So that bit felt kind of fairly natural. And then there was a pivotal moment. So without giving you all the guts of the story, I did choose to take a bit of a sideways step. So in that process of looking after capability still embedded in the IT function, I chose to move into another delivery role because I thought I could add value. Um, and part of that role was actually to take a step down from the leadership team I was on. And I ended up reporting to one of my peers. Now, that for me was not an issue because I genuinely thought I could add value to this piece of delivery. Um, and it was that piece that caused the pivot, I think.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, it's one of the great things about being in corporates that you can
yeah,
use it to navigate to find the things that interest you, where your strengths lie,
yeah,
rather than have to sort of duck out of a job and take a sort of different kind of, big steep learning curve. You're still in the same organization, but you're just
yeah,
your talents and skills and passions and energy into different things. It's a
yeah.
real advantage.
It is a huge advantage because I stayed in that same organization for 16 years,
Yeah.
but I can't even count the number of roles I did, numerous roles over that time. And in that latter part, then, as with all organizations, there was lots of change. And again, being in IT, you're very used to things changing every 6 to 12 months anyway. But there was a point then where that learning and development team got absorbed into the HR function.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so then I formally moved from being an IT guy to being a HR guy. And that was quite different, actually. That was
Yeah.
something that I'd never expected, never anticipated.
Well,
You could have cut me in half and project management would be there. It was a difficult decision to say I'm not going to be a project manager anymore because I'd done it for so long. But then that opened up this whole new arena of thinking about learning and development really holistically. And then because I was still embedded in what we called corporate functions, my clients were the whole of IT and legal and health and safety and group marketing and all kinds of areas that I'd never had exposure to. So that was a real eye opener to see how those different parts of the business worked as well. So yeah, that I would say that happened by accident. I don't know. But it was circumstance, that I was there and suddenly overnight I went from being in one kind of discipline to being recognized as being in a completely different discipline.
yeah, it's funny, isn't it? What that does to
Yeah.
sort of identity as well. That you
Yeah,
suddenly
and
become
it's
an
hard
HR
it's hard to
person.
let go. So we're going to talk about, I think, transition a couple of times today. And that was a real internal transition for me. Exactly what you say. I was no longer the IT guy, or I was no longer the person just the IT people would come and talk to. Suddenly, anybody who was interested in their career and their development, I would literally get approached from all kinds of people.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was really.
On stage. So was this where the insights bit started to come through then?
It
So
started to
we
come
can see
soon after that, yeah.
we
So
can see your bricks behind you there.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
people
And
don't
it's
know about insights. Maybe you just sort of explain a little bit about what that is, because I think
yeah,
people talk about personal branding. This was like personal branding for you in extreme. Everybody would just, you wouldn't say Primo without saying insights. I mean, these two
well,
things
yeah.
became
It's the funny
synonymous.
thing, Harry. So I have these little four. I'm not sure we're allowed to call them Lego blocks, but Lego blocks, which illustrate the kind of four key styles of personality, really. So we talk about different color energies. So green energy to build relationships and show empathy. Yellow is about influencing and connecting with others. And blue is about analytical and structured thinking. And then the red energy is about delivering results, focusing on our goals. And we use these as the kind of building blocks, literally, the conversations we have about how do people like to work, what's their preference in working with others and communicating. And then from there, we kind of build, quite a detailed model of how we each try to show up. So we started literally using these four building blocks and then explore people's kind of different ways they like to work and communicate with others. And it's a great mechanism for firstly understanding yourself. So it helps each of us raise our own level of self-awareness and appreciate why certain people we might gel with more quickly and others we find it harder to gel with. And then its real superpower comes when you get a team of people together and you start talking about how do those interactions work. And I've seen it so many times, people literally, you can see the light bulbs appearing above their heads when they realize the person they've been having difficulty with in their team, it's because they just approach things from literally different sides of this model. And having that awareness can really then improve the communication within a team. So as a tool, I mean, I probably did my own profile as a delegate 15, 20 years ago, and I loved it the first moment I ever saw it. I would say my profile is 100% accurate as far as I'm concerned. And so when the opportunity arose, I was working in talent development at that point, so within the HR function, and we were running programs for what we called high potential. So people who were mid-career and we believed could be promoted within the next kind of 12 to 18 months. And so I run a couple of tranches of global programs of about 60, 65 people each. So decent sized programs, taking them through this 18-month program. And we used insights as a kind of theme throughout that 18 months. So we got them to think about their style, other people that they work with and work for them, and then how they can kind of make the most of their preferences in terms of how they show up as leaders.
Did you then get like training in this then? Did you become like a practitioner? Was there some kind of
Yeah.
certification or something that
Yeah, no, there absolutely is. So within organizations that are of a decent scale, you can become something called a client practitioner
right?
in the Insights tool. And so there were a bunch of us that were trained up. So again, thanks to that organization, I got trained up. It didn't cost me personally anything to do that. And there was a bunch of probably about 20 of us all together within the organization that could deliver these products. And they typically show up as a half a day or a day's workshop where
Right.
you work with a team on, some of those themes I've mentioned. And so once I started being able to do that as part of my day job, I think that's when I had a real realization that I would love to do more of this. And I think it's safe to say within the 12 or 18 months from when I first got certified, I was delivering more workshops than any of my peers, just because I would actually rearrange my work to do as many as possible and then just make it work. Basically, I'd squeeze the rest of my work in around the workshops. And my boss was okay as long as I was delivering the other stuff, which I was, and I was much happier because I was spending more time doing this, which I really loved.
Yeah, great. But were you conscious, Primo, of that you might at some stage leave then, and therefore it would be an asset you'd take with
Yeah, it's funny. I only at that point to the degree that I'd said to a few people, "Oh, if I could just do the insights part of my job, and they would just pay me for that piece, that would be amazing. I'd love to do that."
you?
And if you speak to some of my friends now who worked with me at the time, they'll say that I said that probably on numerous occasions. I didn't plan for what to happen happened, but I certainly had that thought that I knew this was the part that I really enjoyed most about all the work I did. And I enjoyed lots of other parts, but as with any big corporate role, you're always going to do parts that you don't enjoy so much. You're always going to do parts that you either find boring or tedious or whatever it might be. And you're always going to interact with people that, are more difficult to get on with for whatever perspective.
Yeah, I agree.
Um,
Yeah.
so there was always a sense of, in the back of my mind, I guess there was this sense of here's an area I could really focus on, and yeah. But I hadn't got as far as saying how would I put that into practice.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to me. The main reason I want to speak to you is this point really because a lot of the work I do with people that are thinking about leaving is about working out what it is they're going to do next, but also having clarity around their
Mm.
offer, and
Yeah,
um, and and before they've left, ideally, it would be great to have that sort of landed so so you've got that asset to take with you. And I think we both know Steve Cook is another guy from
yeah,
BP, one of the first people I did a podcast with, and he trained a kind of at BP's expense as well to become a board advisor and
mm,
and become chair of boards. as well. And then, of course, as he leaves, he's got that asset to draw on for his next part of his life. And I see it
Mm.
absolutely the same with you here. BP trained you, and they got value, of course, from just like they did.
Yeah,
See, they got value from that training in that you were then able to deliver that to others. But you left with that asset too. It didn't stay in the company. It didn't
mm,
stay in a kind of old version of Primo. It went
yeah,
with Primo for you to go off and do more with it. And I think even if you don't have this sort of branded, certified experience like insights, there are plenty of those examples where we've got this experience or the skill or some knowledge in some way that we can codify and take with us. And what I like is that you were started to become aware of that long before you needed to be. So it wasn't then a
yeah,
point like, oh crikey, I'm going to be made redundant. What should I do? Oh, there's insights there. We started to
yeah,
build it with network, but also that thinking about how you might start to use it.
yeah.
So
And it was very much that. And I suppose in the last year or so, year to 18 months of my corporate career, and as you've kind of alluded to, so I was made redundant. So that happened to me. Uh,
Mhm.
But in that last kind of 18 to 12 months, I was starting to think about, okay, is there a practical way to make this happen? So just as a really kind of simple example, I started to think about what would what would the trading name of my business be if I were to have a business? Now, up until then, I'd never really contemplated doing anything except working for a big corporate organization. And I think, I work a lot in kind of what we value. What are our core values? Because again, they drive our brand, but they also drive what we enjoy doing and where we get the most kind of satisfaction in life, as well as just our work. And so at the time when I was in corporate, for a large part of that time, my core values were around security was one of them, and having that kind of steady income was really important.
Mm.
I also had children who were growing up.
Mm.
So as it was coming to the end of this period, I suppose not overly consciously, but I was conscious my children were getting to the age where, that security thing was going to be less important. I was starting to feel like, I'll be okay financially if anything happens. I think earlier on in your career, and certainly if you've got very young children, it's really hard to think that way
Mm.
because, we are committed to mortgages and bills and all the rest of it. And so, as I say, security was a real driver. So there was another piece about being aware that I was able to shift my values to something else. And that was kind of in my thinking in the last kind of 12 months or so.
Did you say you actually set up the company before you left then?
I didn't set it up, but this is really, it seems really silly to me now. I thought about what would the company be called, and I thought about a logo. How could I create some kind of logo which would represent what I wanted to do? So I actually had that graphic and the name ready.
This year.
Even before I knew I was going to
That's
use
funny,
it,
isn't it?
there was something in the back of my head that said, it's worth me spending a bit of time on this because you never know. I guess I
I
was in that
agree.
mindset.
And did you think when you did start thinking about leaving, or when the company started thinking of you leaving, did you think then I could go and work for Insights? Because that must have been a kind of a
Yeah.
potential avenue that you just
I,
went work for the company that
yeah.
had all
So,
that
so
stuff.
in all honesty, this is something I haven't shared very widely. I did approach them informally
Uh,
while I was still at my last organization
Sensible.
and just get a sense of what would it take
Hmm.
to work for them. And so probably while I was still in a corporate career, my natural next thought was, how do I move to a different corporate career?
Yeah.
It was the redundancy that really was the absolute biggest pivot in my story. And again, like lots and lots of people who get made redundant, you find yourself in a very strange position. For the first time in my career, um, I didn't have a job to go to. I finished at the end of December 2020. On the 1st of January, I could literally do anything I wanted to do. So I will say I was fortunate. There is some fortune associated with this. Part of the payoff of being in a company for 16 years and contributing and paying into that company is that they gave me a chunk of cash when I left. And so it was an absolutely perfect time to say, well, let's try and set up on my own. It's never something I'd considered until literally a month or so before I left, when I knew it was going to happen. And I thought, I've literally got nothing to lose. So I was, 52 at the time, 52, soon to be 53. And I just thought, I'll try it for a year, and I've got enough money that if it just doesn't work, I can go out and get another job somewhere else in a year's time.
And
So
so what did you do then on January the 1st? What sort of things did you immediately go to Insights as an idea, or had you got other things as well?
no, actually, it's funny because at that point, I felt like I had a bit of like I say, I had the safety net.
Mm.
I had a bit of license to just try something and see what happened. And so I started to seriously consider, how would this work as me running my own business? How could I sell myself, sell my services? And so what you kind of touched on earlier became really important to me. So the way I do it is I literally sit down with a blank sheet of A4 paper and a pen, and I kind of work out what's going to happen. What am I going to do? Where is my focus? So I started with, what would the offer be? And so I had a bunch of things I could do. I could do a whole bunch of stuff in the leadership development space. I could help teams, form, work out what they're there for, work out their ways of working. I could do coaching one-to-one. And so I used some of my redundancy money to become a certified coach. But I would say informally, I've been coaching for about 30 years, and I've always done that with people in my sphere. And then there was the insights component, which was another part of a potential offering. And so just by, reading tons of stuff, starting to connect with people that I knew from the BP days. And my first set of people that I contacted were people who were associates at BP. So they were self-employed. We had a construct at the time called the Leadership Academy, and we had a number of consultants kind of on the bench who would come in and deliver to senior leaders on a as needs basis. So I knew a handful of those people quite well personally. So I booked one-to-one calls with all of those people in January. And I started to get a sense of what's it like to work for yourself, because I had no concept whatsoever. Just and the best thing that one person told me, which I still pass on to other people today, it's a bit like spinning a coin in the air, being self-employed. And on one side of the coin is opportunity, and on the other side of the coin is uncertainty. And you just got to trust that more of the time it's going to land on the opportunity side. And if you're okay with that, you'll kind of be okay. And I just thought, I know I'm going to be okay with that for 12 months because I can pay. I was very lucky. I could pay the bills for 12 months. So that really stuck with me. I thought, yeah, that's okay, actually. And that whole thing about values then really kicked in. So it was then refocusing on what was really important to me. And what was really important to me was my value of empowering others to be successful. And that has been a strand all the way through my career. But I could kind of move the security things slightly to the back burner now. And I could put more of my focus in what skills do I have to enable other people to be successful. And so that's where I really put my focus.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I really like the way that you thought really broadly about what you did next. Because often, in fact, most of the time I spend with people I help now, it's trying to make them see a much bigger view of themselves because they have quite a
Yeah,
small view, usually kind of job title and a little bit of job description. And
yeah,
okay, I've got this and I'm going to try and match this to something else that's out there. And of course, it's so small that the chance of it
yeah,
mapping neatly to something is very small too. But as you bear out, you've got way more things than just the previous role or an aspect of the role
Yeah.
did, and you
And,
saw a big picture of yourself as
yeah.
opportunities.
And there were these two things coming together. So the branding thing, again, I don't underestimate the branding thing, because my LinkedIn headline was already there and ready to go.
Mm.
So for the past 3 years prior to that, I had not been using my job title in my LinkedIn headline. And that was some advice that we were given. If you want to make yourself a commodity, then say you're a project manager or you're a coach. But there's thousands and thousands of people with that in their LinkedIn profile. So part of the advice was, what is it about me? What do I bring to this that nobody else brings? And so, um, I'm not one for, I'm genuinely not one for blowing my own trumpet at all. But I use, and if you look at my profile today, it says Insights Discovery Expert. Now, a few years ago, I never would have called myself that, but I thought, no, actually, I am. I'm really good at doing this. I've had nothing but great feedback, and I'm enjoying it. So why not? So the headline reflects what value I can bring rather than a job title. So if there's something anyone wants to take away from this, that would be another,
Yeah.
just a really easy piece of advice. Make your headline about what do you bring to this, rather than this was the role that I did last year.
It's so limiting, isn't it? Just
Yeah.
defining yourself by your job title. I love that idea. That it's just
But it's
it's what
easily done, hey, because in corporate life, that's exactly what we do.
exactly. That's what we're
Yeah.
trading all the time. But
Yeah.
actually, of course, really what we're trading is our value, our sources of value, which are many, not
Yes.
just this one role that we happen to be in right now either.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Exactly.
I think it was really, great advice. And so what
Yeah.
did you do then? Like, how did you build this up? Because like now you're just
Yeah.
doing insights, right?
I,
That's
I,
your
it's probably accounts for about 80 to 85% of the work I do.
Really?
Yeah, at least. And so the other thing that happened at that point was, it was like, okay, well, how do I get started? So I was having lots of conversations. I was doing a few kind of seminars on how to become self-employed and the mechanics of setting up a business and all of that kind of stuff. And then it was just blindingly obvious. Once I'd written these things down on a piece of paper that said, here's what I could deliver, insights just literally jumped out of the page, because I could walk into any organization tomorrow and do it. I just knew I could, because I'd been doing that for at least 18 months. And so that's where I put my initial focus. And again, I know, speaking to lots of other self-employed people, kind of finding your niche is sometimes hard for people, and I had a little bit of that. I thought, oh, I really want to do some coaching, and I could do lots of coaching. But the easiest thing, in all honesty, I chose the easiest thing so that I could get started as quickly as possible. So the company started trading on the 15th of January that year, 2001. And then I did a couple of kind of pro bono things. I just turned up and did some stuff for people free of charge, just to show that I could still get out and do it to people that were not my old employer. And then by kind of July, I had my first couple of things scheduled. And so the way that I did that was using that network. So again, for me personally, I can't underestimate the power of the network I have created over the last 5 years, probably.
And LinkedIn has been your main
So
main
yeah,
tool to build that
to the point where when I started in that first couple of months, I made a conscious decision February, March time. So very early on, I'm not even going to have a website. There's literally no need to have a website to direct people to. Come and find me on LinkedIn. This is my platform. This is where my network is. This is where I'm going to operate. And that was a very conscious choice. And then it was through that network. So I did a couple of things just to really try and kick things off. I sent a couple of blanket messages out to the whole network saying, if you haven't heard, I'm now doing this. If you need any help, or anyone who needs help, let me know. And then I went through my LinkedIn contacts, which must have been about, I don't know, 900 at that point. No, probably, touching on 1,000 people. And it's over 2,500 at the minute. but I then got it down to a very tight group of 30 to 50 people, and I individually approached them. And they were people who were ex BP, so senior people I'd worked with at BP that had now moved on to other organizations. And I'll give a shout out to Tessa, who was one of my old bosses at BP. Tessa gave me the really obvious thing that just I had not thought of myself, which is go back to that group of senior leaders that you were training to be even more senior and go and see what they're doing now, which is so obvious now you say it, because the whole point was we were creating the leaders of the future in that role. And so I pinged all of them. And just as an example, without naming the organization, one of them had left BP and gone to a major global organization. And through that introduction, that customer is still the one that I work the most for since I started delivering insights for them all over Europe and occasionally in the States.
That is such good advice, isn't it? Going, look, it's so easy for us to imagine that the network is out there somehow, but actually
Yeah.
it's here. Very often it's here. It's just not been nurtured. It's
Where?
You've not tried to address it with a different offer or a different explanation of how you can add value. And of course, everybody's busy, everybody's distracted, so nobody's thinking about you. So you just have to remind
Right.
people that you're here.
Yeah,
This is
exactly
this
that.
is maybe what you did in the past for them, and you'd love to do it again. Or even, I'm sure, knowing you, it wasn't a hard sell, and you were just saying, I'm doing this stuff. Do you want to have a chat? And so it's very,
Yeah,
very low threat.
it was very casual, and
Yeah.
it was, and again, my style, my personal style is, you know, if and when you need me, let me know
Yeah.
type thing. I wasn't pushing anything hard. And a couple of people came back fairly quickly. And like I say, through a couple of those network connections, I got the first few pieces of work, one of which, so I started in, oh gosh, about the middle to the late part of that first year. And that company now is my key client. I do the most work for this particular client. And that's from one connection who used to be on the training course that I took them through.
That's
So
brilliant,
that's
isn't
kind
it?
of nice.
And so
That's
what
kind
was
of
your
nice.
confidence to I'm doing it like I'm assuming it's gonna go that. What was your confidence like when you were starting to sell like that? People were picking you.
Yeah, it was okay. My target for the first year was like make a profit. Even if it was like £1, I would have been happy in year one. And I'm happy to share, I made about 10K profit in the first year. So I thought, okay, it's a positive number. I'm really happy with that. And since then, it's grown and grown. So, I don't work full time. I probably work about 3/4 of my time. So that work-life balance is still really important to me. I, get to choose where and when I work, which is great. And, for me personally, as long as we can pay the bills, I'm kind of happy, to be honest. So the financial thing has never been the driver. Doing the work is really interesting. Sometimes people say to me, "Oh, do you not get bored of just doing insights?" And it's a bit like, so my oldest son is an actor, so he's 23. It would be like saying to him, "Do you not get bored of performing the same thing every time?" But literally every audience is different. The energy in the room is different every
Oh,
single
yeah, I'm
time.
sure.
People say different things and just realize different things about themselves in every single session. So for me personally, never gets boring ever.
I
Yeah.
do think it's a terrific asset you were able to bring with you. And although not everyone will have that kind of tangible aspect to what they offer, I do think it's a bit of a mindset shift there too. It doesn't just need to be something recognized and certified. Make your own, make your own
Yeah.
version of whatever it is
Yeah.
that you do, package that,
Yeah.
create a product around it, and then do what
Yeah.
you do, which is effectively do
Absolutely.
marketing yourself still of
Yeah.
what you're
Yeah.
offering.
Yeah, and if I could very briefly talk to like the other 20%, the other 20% of what I do is largely that. So it's interesting, I find when I talk to my peers, the work that you and I did at the big corporate, we might think of a lot of that work as common sense. This is just common sense. Everybody does things like this. And I'm sure I've read this in your blog already. You get out into the real world and you go into other organizations, and it's not common sense to them. They're in quite different places. They haven't had the learning and development budget that the big organizations had. They haven't had dedicated training teams, dedicated recruiters, dedicated whatever. The concept of skills and developing skills and capabilities is quite alien to lots of places. So there is a lot of value in what we might take for granted from our corporate career, and exactly what you say. So my space is, how do I bring this team to be more effective? How do we create a high performing team? So there's lots of bits of things I've learned over the years that I'm able to, package together and go to somebody for half a day or a day and say, I can help your team achieve these outcomes using these tools and techniques, which to them is like, this is amazing. We didn't know any of this. And yet to you and I, it's like, no, this is real basic stuff.
That's true. But also, it just makes you realize how much value you have when you leave. And that's just a
Absolutely.
core part of the book. Everything I'm trying to do is wake
Yeah.
up to this, because it's so easy when you're in it to just think everybody knows that. You probably go, well, there's a bunch of other people that can do the same course if I'm not around to. But actually,
Yeah.
the reason you were the one that was being asked for, and it's been successful afterwards, is because of all that depth of experience here. You're well practiced in it, but also you were living this life like many
Yeah.
other people that you're now working with. And that
Yeah.
experience and empathy and connection, I think, means that you create shortcuts for these organizations. I mean, they could get there eventually just working through themselves, but
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah,
just
of
a
course.
day, and they actually can accelerate through that. So
Yeah,
valuable.
absolutely. And again, it's exactly that I can absolutely see their perspective, because I was there for most of my career. I know how frustrating it is to work with this department when you're in this department and the two don't talk to each other. I've been I've been there. So yeah, I can absolutely rock up to any, decent sized organization and say, I feel your pain, I've done that.
Well, that is brilliant, Primo. Thanks so much. I think it's a really inspiring story. And although you could just say, "Oh, well, he's lucky he got this gig with Insights and it gave him," actually, you've made more around it that's made it work. And there are plenty of ways for people like us to package our knowledge and experience up, and then go and help others that maybe haven't had the same kind of experience and access to tools and you know consultants and everything that we've all had working for these big companies. So
Yeah.
I think it's a great story. I hope it really makes people think, I could do that myself.
Okay, amazing. Well, an absolute honor, because you're a bit of a celebrity these days, all over LinkedIn. Published author. It's like, so
I'm going to keep this
so
in the podcast and not edit it out.
absolute honor.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Primo.
That's okay. Great to see you.
You too. Bye now.
Cheers. Bye bye.